The movie Wanted, released in 2008, brought together a diverse and high-profile cast led by Angelina Jolie and James McAvoy, supported by veteran actors such as Morgan Freeman and Terrence Stamp. Each performer entered the film at a different stage in their career, and their involvement in the stylized action thriller had a noticeable impact on how audiences perceived them afterward. Angelina Jolie, who played the character Fox, was already one of the most globally recognized film stars by the time Wanted was released. Before this film, she had built a reputation through a combination of dramatic performances and action-oriented roles. Early in her career, she gained attention for Girl, Interrupted, a performance that earned her major awards recognition and established her as a serious dramatic actress. She later transitioned into large-scale action cinema, with roles in Lara Croft Tomb Raider, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. These films position her as a rare combination of dramatic talent and physical action presence. In Wanted, Jolie leaned heavily into her established action star identity, but with a colder, more mysterious edge. Her role as Fox was minimal in dialogue, but heavily reliant on physical expression, combat choreography, and screen presence. This performance reinforced her status as one of the defining action figures of the 2000s. While the role did not dramatically shift her career path, it strengthened her association with stylized, hyperkinetic action films and helped cement her global icon status even further. After Wanted, Jolie continued to move between action blockbusters and serious dramatic roles, later taking on projects such as Salt and Maleficent, which further expanded her range in both commercial and fantasy-driven cinema. James McAvoy, who played the lead character Wesley Gibson, was at a very different stage in his career. Before Wanted, McAvoy was primarily known for dramatic and fantasy-oriented roles. He had earned critical respect for performances in The Last King of Scotland, where he acted alongside Forest Whitaker in Atonement, a period drama that showcases emotional depth and subtle acting style. He also appeared in The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as Mr. Tumnus, which introduced him to a wide family audience. Wanted marked a major turning point for McAvoy. It was one of his first major Hollywood action roles, and it required him to undergo a physical and stylistic transformation. His character begins as a passive, frustrated office worker and evolves into a highly trained assassin. This arc allowed McAvoy to combine emotional vulnerability with physical intensity. The role helped him transition into more mainstream action and blockbuster films, expanding his career beyond British drama. After Wanted, McAvoy continued to diversify his roles, eventually gaining major recognition in films such as X-Men First Class and later installments in that franchise, where he played a younger version of a well-known character. His performance in Wanted is often seen as a bridge between his early dramatic work and his later action-oriented career phase. Morgan Freeman played the character known as Sloane, a key figure in the secret organization at the center of the story. Freeman was already an established legendary actor long before Wanted, with a career spanning decades. His earlier work included iconic performances in films such as The Shawshank Redemption, Say 7N, Driving Miss Daisy, and $1 Million Baby, for which he won an Academy Award. Freeman was known for his calm authority, distinctive voice, and ability to bring gravity to any role he played. In Wanted, Freeman's casting plays into this established persona. Sloane appears as a mentor figure, presenting himself as a moral guide within the secret assassin organization. Freeman's presence adds credibility and weight to the film's mythology, even when the narrative becomes exaggerated or stylized. His performance did not significantly alter his career trajectory, as he was already at a stage where he selected roles based on interest rather than career building. However, it reinforced his continued relevance in blockbuster cinema during the 2000s and 2010s, where he often appeared in supporting roles that added authority to major productions. Terrence Stamp portrayed the character known as a priest, a former leader within the assassin organization. Stamp had a long and varied career dating back to the 1960s, where he first gained fame as a young leading man in British cinema. Over time, he became known for his ability to play intense, sometimes villainous or enigmatic characters. Notable earlier performances included The Collector and a portrayal of General Zod in Superman and Superman 2, which made him a recognizable figure in global pop culture. In Wanted, Stamp brought a sense of legacy and gravitas to the story. His character represents the moral consequences and hidden truths behind the assassin organization. While his role is not extensive in screen time, it is crucial to the story's thematic foundation. For Stamp, Wanted was another example of his later career work, in which he often played wise, hardened, or morally complex characters. It did not redefine his career, but it reaffirmed his ability to adapt to modern cinematic styles while maintaining his classical acting presence. Common, who played the character known as the Gunsmith, was primarily known before Wanted as a rapper and hip-hop artist rather than a traditional film actor. His transition into film had already begun with smaller roles and supporting appearances, but Wanted gave him a more visible presence in a major Hollywood production. His character is part of the assassin group and is responsible for weapons training and combat preparation. For Common, Wanted contributed to his growing credibility as an actor. It helped him move further into Hollywood cinema, leading to later roles in action films and dramas. Over time, he became recognized as a multidisciplinary artist, balancing music and acting careers. His performance in Wanted was part of his early establishment as a legitimate screen actor beyond his music career. Thomas Kretschmann played Cross, the primary antagonist of the film and the biological father of Wesley Gibson. When Wanted was released in 2008, it entered a cinematic landscape that was already saturated with action films, yet it managed to stand apart through its exaggerated visual language, stylized violence, and comic book-inspired storytelling. Although it was not a traditional superhero movie, it arrived during a period when comic book adaptations were rapidly reshaping mainstream cinema. Films like Spider-Man, Batman Begins, and Iron Man were redefining what action blockbusters could look like, and Wanted contributed to that evolution by pushing the idea of hyperstylization even further into fantasy physics and visual distortion. One of the most significant cultural impacts of Wanted was his embrace of the idea that action could be intentionally unrealistic, almost video game-like in execution. The concept of bullets curving through the air became one of the most recognizable visual ideas associated with the film. This was not just a stylistic flourish. It became a pop culture reference point. The curved bullet mechanic entered broader entertainment conversations and was later referenced, parodied, and reinterpreted in other media. It helped popularize the idea that physics in action films could be bent or rewritten entirely for visual impact rather than strict realism. In a broader sense, Wanted reflected a shift in audience expectations during the late 2000s. Viewers were becoming more accustomed to fast editing, digital effects, and heightened reality storytelling. The film leaned into this trend aggressively, offering a world where assassins operated in secret societies with almost mythological abilities. This contributed to the growing acceptance of stylized violence as entertainment rather than realism-driven action. It also aligned with the rise of graphic novel adaptations, where visual exaggeration was not only accepted but expected. Angelina Jolie's role in the film also had cultural significance beyond the narrative itself. At the time, she was already considered one of the most recognizable women in global cinema, but Wanted reinforce her image as a dominant action figure. Her portrayal of Fox contributed to the continuing evolution of female action characters in Hollywood. While earlier decades often limited women in action films to supporting or secondary roles, Jolie's presence in Wanted reinforced the idea that women could be central figures in high-intensity action narratives without being reduced to traditional archetypes. This influence can be seen in later action films that place women at the center of combat-driven stories. James McAvoy's transformation from an ordinary office worker to an elite assassin also resonated with audiences in a cultural sense. The character arc reflected a fantasy of empowerment that was particularly relevant in the late 2000s, a period marked by economic uncertainty and workplace dissatisfaction in many parts of the world. The idea that an average, frustrated individual could suddenly be elevated into a powerful and extraordinary role spoke to a common escapist desire in popular media. This theme has been echoed in later films and television series that explore hidden potential and secret identity transformations. Wanted also contributed to the popularization of secret society narratives in mainstream entertainment. While the idea of hidden organizations controlling events is not new, the film presented it in a modern, industrial, almost corporate structure. The assassin organization functioned like a distorted version of a workplace hierarchy, complete with training systems, missions, and leadership structures. This interpretation influenced later storytelling in films, television series, and even video games, where secret organizations are often depicted as bureaucratic yet violent systems rather than purely mystical groups. In terms of visual culture, the film's aesthetic had a noticeable impact on editing styles in action cinema and advertising. The use of extreme slow motion, rapid acceleration, and dynamic camera movement became more common in subsequent action films and promotional media. Even outside of cinema, music videos and commercials adopted similar techniques, borrowing the sense of heightened reality and kinetic movement that Wanted helped popularize. The film also had a role in the ongoing conversation about comic book adaptations. Although it was not directly based on a mainstream superhero franchise, it demonstrated that comic-inspired storytelling could succeed outside of traditional hero narratives. This opened the door for more experimental adaptations that focused on tone and visual identity rather than strict adherence to established superhero lore. In that sense, Wanted occupies a transitional space between traditional action films and the modern era of graphic novel-inspired cinema. In terms of political or social interpretation, Wanted did not directly engage with real-world politics, but it did reflect certain anxieties about power, control, and identity. The idea of individuals being selected, trained, and reshaped by a hidden organization can be interpreted as a metaphor for systems of influence that operate behind everyday life. While the film presents this idea in a fantastical way, audiences often connect such narratives to broader questions about autonomy and control in modern society. The film also became part of internet culture during the rise of early social media platforms. Scenes from Wanted, particularly the bullet curving sequence, were widely shared in clips, forums, and early meme culture. It was frequently referenced in discussions about over-the-top action movies, and became shorthand for exaggerated cinematic physics. Even years after its release, the film is still mentioned in online discussions whenever stylized action sequences are debated. The narrative structure of Wanted is built around a transformation arc that takes the protagonist from complete insignificance to extraordinary capability, while simultaneously revealing a hidden world operating beneath everyday reality. The story is deliberately framed in a way that mirrors a classic initiation journey, but it is executed with extreme stylization, non-linear revelations, and escalating violence that redefines the rules of the world as the plot progresses. The film begins with Wesley Gibson, an ordinary office worker, living a life defined by routine, frustration, and passivity. The opening structure is intentionally mundane, emphasizing repetition and psychological stagnation. Wesley is introduced in an environment that visually and narratively reflects his internal state. His workspace is cramped, noisy, and controlled by a domineering supervisor, reinforcing his lack of agency. His personal life is equally unstable, marked by betrayal and emotional detachment. This foundation is essential because it establishes the contrast needed for his later transformation to feel impactful. The inciting incident occurs when Wesley is approached by Fox, who introduces him to the idea that his life is connected to a hidden organization of assassins. This moment functions as a narrative rupture, breaking the established realism of Wesley's world and introducing the concept that extraordinary forces exist just beyond his perception. The pacing at this stage shifts from slow, repetitive sequences to sudden bursts of violence and action, signaling the beginning of a transition into a new reality. Wesley is then brought into Fraternity, a secret organization that trains elite assassins. This section of the narrative follows a structured initiation pattern. Wesley is tested physically, mentally, and psychologically. The training process is harsh and often humiliating, designed to break his previous identity and rebuild him into a weapon. The narrative structure here is episodic, with each training segment functioning as a separate stage in his transformation. He learns combat skills, weapon handling, reflex control, and the philosophical framework of the organization, which justifies assassination as a form of restoring balance. A key turning point occurs when Wesley begins to realize that his transformation is not just external, but also tied to hidden truths about his identity. The story introduces the idea that his past is connected to Fraternity in ways he does not initially understand. This creates a dual narrative structure, one focus on his training and empowerment, and another focus on uncovering hidden history and deception. As Wesley becomes more capable, the film's structure accelerates. Action sequences become more frequent and more visually extreme, reflecting his internal evolution. the narrative begins to shift from training to execution of missions. These missions are presented as tests of loyalty and skill, but they also serve as narrative devices to reveal deeper layers of the organization's ideology and internal conflict. A major structural shift occurs when Wesley learns that the organization he has joined may not be as morally justified as it claims to be. This revelation disrupts the linear progression of his transformation. The narrative introduces ambiguity regarding authority, truth, and manipulation. At this stage, the story transitions from a simple empowerment arc into a conspiracy-driven structure, where the protagonist must question everything he's been taught. The midpoint of the film is marked by a revelation about Wesley's personal history. It is revealed that his biological father is connected to fraternity and has a direct role in shaping the conflict within the organization. This twist recontextualizes earlier events and adds emotional weight to the narrative. The structure shifts again, now combining personal identity discovery with organizational betrayal. From this point forward, the narrative becomes increasingly unstable in a deliberate way. Wesley moves from being a student to becoming an independent force within the story. The fraternity itself begins to fracture, revealing internal corruption and conflicting agendas. This creates a three-layered narrative structure: Wesley's personal evolution, the internal politics of the organization, and external consequences of their actions in the wider world. The climax of the film is structured around confrontation and revelation. Wesley must face not only external enemies, but also the ideological system that shaped him. The final sequence brings together all narrative threads, including his relationship with Fox, his connection to his father, and the moral framework of the fraternity. The action intensifies into a highly stylized confrontation, where traditional physics and realism are fully abandoned in favor of symbolic, exaggerated combat sequences. The resolution of the film does not return to normalcy in a traditional sense. Instead, it redefines Wesley's position in the world. Rather than completing a simple hero arc, the narrative closes with ambiguity about power, control, and identity. The structure resists a fully conventional ending, instead reinforcing the idea that transformation is ongoing and that systems of power continue to exist beyond individual victory. Overall, the narrative structure wanted is built on escalation, revelation, and destabilization. It begins with realism, moves into initiation, expands into conspiracy, and ends in philosophical ambiguity. Each stage is marked by increased intensity and shifting narrative focus, creating a story that is less about a single journey and more about the breakdown and reconstruction of identity within a hidden world of violence and control. Wanted uses its exaggerated action framework to explore a surprisingly layered set of themes, even though they are delivered through a highly stylized and often unrealistic visual language. At its core, the film is about identity, control, transformation, and the human desire to escape limitation. These ideas are not presented in a subtle or abstract way, but rather embedded directly into the structure of the story, the behavior of characters, and the visual metaphors used throughout the film. One of the most dominant themes is the idea of identity reconstruction. Wesley Gibson begins the film as someone who has completely surrendered control over his life. He is passive, emotionally disconnected, and defined by external forces such as his job, his environment, and his personal relationships. The fraternity represents a system that promises to erase weakness and rebuild the self into something powerful and purposeful. However, this transformation is not purely liberating. It raises the question of whether identity is being discovered or manufactured. The film constantly blurs the line between self-improvement and psychological reprogramming. This theme is reinforced through the symbolism of training and breaking. Wesley's initiation into fraternity is not just physical training, but symbolic destruction of his former identity. Pain, humiliation, and repetition are used as tools to dismantle his old sense of self. In symbolic terms, this represents the idea that society often requires individuals to abandon their previous identities in order to gain power or acceptance. However, the film complicates this idea by suggesting that the new identity may be just as controlled and artificial as the old one. Another major theme is control versus free will. The fraternity presents itself as a force of balance and justice, operating under belief that certain individuals are destined for specific outcomes. This raises questions about whether characters are truly making choices or simply following predetermined paths. The concept of fate is subtly embedded into the organization's ideology, suggesting that some people are born to be tools of violence, while others are destined to be eliminated. Wesley's journey becomes a struggle against this deterministic worldview, even as he is shaped by it. The symbol of the loom plays a central role in expressing this theme. The loom, which is used by a fraternity to identify targets, represents the idea that human lives are interconnected through patterns that can be interpreted and acted upon. It functions as a visual metaphor for destiny being woven into existence. However, the film also suggests that interpretation of these patterns may be flawed or manipulated, raising doubts about whether fate is real or constructed by those in power. Violence in Wanted is also symbolic rather than purely physical. The exaggerated nature of combat, particularly the bending of bullets and impossible stunts, transforms violence into a form of expression rather than realism. This stylization suggests that violence in the world of the film is not just destruction, but also communication. Every act of combat represents a shift in power, identity, or ideology. The bending bullets in particular symbolize the idea that reality itself can be reshaped by willpower, training, and belief. They visually represent control over chaos. The theme of fatherhood and lineage is another important symbolic layer. Wesley's connection to his biological father introduces the idea that identity is inherited as well as constructed. The father figure in the film represents both origin and corruption. He is tied to the system that shaped Wesley, yet also exists as someone who may have attempted to challenge it. This duality reflects the tension between inherited identity and self-determined identity. The film uses this relationship to explore whether individuals are bound by their origins or capable of breaking free from them. The fraternity itself functions as a symbol of hidden systems of power. On the surface, it appears to be a secret society of assassins, but symbolically it represents any invisible structure that influences human behavior without direct awareness. It can be interpreted as a metaphor for corporate systems, political influence, or social conditioning. Its structured hierarchy, rules, and rituals suggest that even those who believe they are free may still be operated within controlled frameworks. Fox, as a character, also carries symbolic meaning. She represents loyalty to the system, but also emotional detachment. Her calm, controlled demeanor, and near constant obedience to fraternity's rules symbolize the cost of total integration into a system of control. At the same time, her interactions with Wesley hint at suppressed individuality and emotional conflict, suggesting that even those deeply embedded in the system retain fragments of personal identity. The transformation of Wesley himself is perhaps the strongest symbolic arc in the film. He begins as invisibility and ends as hypervisibility. At the start, he is ignored, dismissed, and powerless. By the end, he is capable of reshaping reality within the film's exaggerated physics. This shift symbolizes the extreme fantasy of self-empowerment, but also raises the question of what is lost in the process. His transformation suggests that gaining power may require surrendering authenticity. The visual style of Wanted is one of its most defining and memorable aspects, and it plays a central role in how the story is experienced. The film does not aim for realism in its visual presentation. Instead, it embraces a heightened, almost surreal aesthetic that blends comic book imagery with hyperkinetic cinematography and digitally enhanced action. This approach creates a world that feels exaggerated, controlled, and intentionally artificial, reinforcing the film's themes of transformation and manipulated reality. Director Timur Bekmambetov brought a distinctive visual language to Hollywood with Wanted, shaped by his earlier work in Russian cinema. His style is characterized by extreme camera movement, rapid shifts in perspective, and a willingness to distort physical space for emotional and dramatic effect. In Wanted, this style is amplified through extensive use of digital effects and innovative camera techniques, resulting in sequences that feel closer to animated motion than traditional live-action filming. One of the most recognizable visual techniques in the film is the use of bullet time and bullet curvature effects. Rather than simply slowing down time, the film visually reshapes the trajectory of bullets, allowing them to bend through space. This is not just a technical effect, but a core visual metaphor for control over reality. The cinematography often follows these bullets in long, sweeping arcs, turning simple gunfire into complex visual choreography. The camera becomes fluid, almost weightless, moving through environments in ways that defy normal physics. Lighting plays a crucial role in establishing the film's tone. Many scenes use high-contrast lighting, with deep shadows and sharp highlights that create a graphic novel-inspired look. Interiors are often dimly lit, with focused pools of light that isolate characters within the frame. This technique emphasizes emotional isolation and psychological intensity. In contrast, action sequences often use brighter, more dynamic lighting that enhances motion and highlights fragmentation during combat. Color grading is another important element of the cinematography. The film tends to favor desaturated tones in everyday environments, reflecting the dullness of Wesley Gibson's initial life. As the story progresses into the world of fraternity, the color palette becomes more stylized, with richer contrasts and more dramatic shifts in hue. This gradual change in color language mirrors Wesley's transformation from passive observer to active participant in a heightened reality. Camera movement in Wanted is highly aggressive and deliberately unconventional. The cinematography frequently employs rapid pans, sudden zooms, and sweeping tracking shots that follow characters through chaotic environments. These movements are often exaggerated beyond what would be physically possible in real life, creating a sense of instability and heightened perception. The camera does not simply observe action, it participates in it, almost as if it is another character within the scene. One of the most important visual motifs in the film is fragmentation. During action sequences, bodies, objects, and environment are often broken into visual pieces through slow motion and rapid cutting. This fragmentation reinforces the idea that reality itself is unstable and can be reassembled in different ways depending on perspective and control. Explosions, gunfire, and physical impacts are often shown in layered sequences where multiple temporal perspectives overlap within a single moment. The film also makes extensive use of motion control photography, allowing complex action sequences to be filmed multiple times with precise camera replication. This technique enables the blending of live action with digital environments in a seamless way. It is particularly important in sequences where characters move through environments at impossible speeds or angles. The result is a visual experience that feels carefully constructed yet chaotic at the same time. Set design and cinematography work closely together to create contrasting environments. The early office settings are visually cramped, filled with repetitive structures, fluorescent lighting, and muted colors. These scenes are shot in a more static style, with limited camera movement and a sense of confinement. As the narrative shifts into the world of fraternity, the camera becomes more dynamic, and environments open up into larger, more abstract spaces that allow for greater visual experimentation. The fraternity headquarters is a key example of this visual transformation. It is designed with a blend of industrial architecture and symbolic detail, and the cinematography emphasizes scale and depth. Wide-angle lenses are used to exaggerate space, making the environment feel both vast and controlled. Characters often appear small within the frame, reinforcing the idea that they are part of a larger system. Action choreography is tightly integrated with cinematography. Rather than filming fight scenes in a traditional handheld style, the film uses carefully planned camera paths that align with movement sequences. This creates a sense of precision within chaos. Every punch, shot, and movement is framed in a way that maximizes visual impact. The camera often slows down or accelerates independently of the action, creating a disorienting but controlled rhythm. Digital effects are not used as a separate layer, but are fully integrated into the cinematography. Environments are extended, backgrounds are enhanced, and physical interactions are augmented to create impossible scenarios. However, the goal is not to hide reality, but to transform it. The visual effects are deliberately noticeable in their style, contributing to the film's artificial aesthetic rather than attempting photorealism. The soundscape of Wanted is a crucial element in shaping the film's identity, working hand in hand with extreme visual style to create a heightened sensory experience. Rather than treating sound as a background layer, the film uses music and sound design as active storytelling tools. Every gunshot, movement, and musical cue is carefully engineered to reinforce the film's tone of controlled chaos and stylized violence. The musical score was composed by Danny Elfman, a composer known for his ability to blend dark orchestral themes with eccentric, sometimes whimsical tonal shifts. In Wanted, Elfman creates a score that oscillates between tension, irony, and intensity. The music does not simply follow the action. It often contrasts it, creating a layered emotional effect. For example, moments of extreme violence may be accompanied by rhythmic or almost playful musical phrasing, which enhances the surreal quality of the film's world. One of the key functions of the soundtrack is to reflect Wesley Gibson's transformation. In the early part of the film, the music is subdued, repetitive, and emotionally restrained. It mirrors his dull, constrained life in the office environment. The sound design in these scenes is dominated by mechanical office noises, muted conversations, and repetitive ambient sound loops. This creates an auditory sense of stagnation, reinforcing the idea that Wesley is trapped in an uninspired routine. As Wesley enters the world of the fraternity, the soundscape changes dramatically. The music becomes more dynamic, layered, and aggressive. Percussion elements become more pronounced, and orchestral themes are introduced with greater intensity. This shift in musical structure reflects his psychological and physical awakening. The soundtrack essentially tracks his progression from passivity to empowerment. Sound design in action sequences is one of the most distinctive aspects of Wanted. Gunfire is not presented in a realistic manner. Instead, it is exaggerated, sharpened, and stylized to match the film's visual bending of physics. Each bullet has a distinct auditory signature, often enhanced with layered sound effects that emphasize speed, impact, and trajectory. When bullets curve through the air, the sound design follows their path, creating an auditory arc that mirrors the visual one. This synchronization between sound and image is central to the film's immersive effect. Impact sounds are heavily stylized. Punches, collisions, and physical strikes are amplified beyond natural levels, giving every movement a sense of exaggerated weight and consequence. These sounds are not meant to replicate reality, but to enhance emotional perception. A single punch may be accompanied by multiple layered effects, including deep bass hits, sharp cracking noises, and subtle reverberation that suggests environmental disruption. Silence is also used strategically throughout the film. In certain moments, particularly during moments of realization or emotional tension, the sound drops away almost completely. This creates a sharp contrast with the surrounding chaos, drawing attention to specific narrative beats. Silence in Wanted is not absence but emphasis, highlighting moments where the character's internal state becomes more important than external action. The integration of music with editing rhythm is another important aspect of the film's sound design. Many action sequences are structured almost like music videos, where cuts and movements are timed to musical beats. This creates a rhythmic flow that enhances the feeling of acceleration and control. The editing and score are deeply interconnected, making it difficult to separate visual pacing from auditory structure. Environmental sound design also plays a significant role in world building. Different locations within the film have distinct sound profiles. The office environment is filled with repetitive mechanical and electronic sounds, reinforcing monotony. The fraternity headquarters has a more echoing, hollow acoustic quality, emphasizing scale and secrecy. Outdoor action scenes feature expanded spatial audio, giving a sense of openness and unpredictability. A particularly important element of the sound design is its role in reinforcing the film's concept of heightened perception. As Wesley becomes more skilled, the sound world around him becomes more detailed and intensified. Small auditory elements that would normally go unnoticed become pronounced. This suggests that his training is not only physical but sensory, allowing him to perceive the world in a more advanced and controlled way. The film also uses sound to blur the line between reality and subjective experience. During certain action sequences, audio becomes distorted or exaggerated in ways that suggest altered perception. This includes slowed sound effects, amplified echoes, and layered distortions that reflect the character's mental state during moments of extreme focus or stress. In addition to orchestral scoring, the film incorporates modern electronic elements that contribute to its contemporary feel. These electronic textures are often used in transitions or high-intensity moments, adding a mechanical, almost digital quality to the soundscape. This reinforces the idea that the world of Wanted is not naturalistic, but constructed, almost like a simulation of violence and power. Upon its release in 2008, Wanted received a mixed to generally positive reception from critics and a stronger response from mainstream audiences. The film was widely recognized for its bold visual style, high-energy action sequences, and willingness to embrace exaggerated comic book logic, but also faced criticism for its narrative structure, character development, and reliance on style over substance. This split between critical interpretation and audience enjoyment became one of the defining aspects of the film's reception. Many critics praised the film's visual ambition. The curved bullet sequences, extreme slow motion effects, and dynamic camera movement were frequently highlighted as innovative and visually striking. At the time, these techniques felt fresh in mainstream Hollywood action cinema, even if some of them were influenced by earlier stylized films and graphic novel adaptations. The film was often described as visually inventive, with a distinct identity that separated it from more grounded action films of the same era. However, criticism often centered on the storyline and character depth. Some reviewers argued that the plot was secondary to the visual spectacle, and that the narrative relied heavily on familiar tropes, such as secret societies, hidden lineage, and reluctant hero transformation. Wesley Gibson's arc from ordinary worker to elite assassin was seen by some as predictable, even if it was executed with stylistic flair. Critics also pointed out that certain emotional beats were overshadowed by the film's fast pacing and visual intensity. Angelina Jolie's performance as Fox received generally positive attention, although it was often noted that her character was intentionally minimal in dialogue and emotional exposition. Many reviewers interpreted her role as more symbolic than fully developed, representing the archetype of the controlled, highly trained assassin. Her screen presence and physical performance were widely acknowledged as strong, but some critics felt the character was underutilized in terms of narrative depth. James McAvoy's performance was more widely discussed in terms of range and transformation. Critics generally appreciate his ability to shift from a passive, awkward character to a confident and physically capable assassin. His portrayal of Wesley Gibson was seen as one of the stronger elements of the film, particularly because it required both comedic timing and physical intensity. However, some reviews suggested that the rapid progression of his character arc made emotional development feel compressed. Morgan Freeman's role as Sloane was also noted positively, though often in a restrained way. Critics acknowledged that Freeman brought authority and credibility to the film, but also pointed out that his character fit into a familiar mentor archetype. His presence elevated the material, even if the role itself did not require significant emotional range. Audience reception, in contrast to critical analysis, was generally more enthusiastic. Many viewers responded positively to the film's over-the-top action style and its willingness to fully embrace fantasy physics. The entertainment value of the action sequences often outweighed concerns about narrative depth. For many audiences, wanted function as a spectacle-driven experience rather than a traditional character-focused drama. The film performed well at the global box office, which reinforced its status as a commercially successful action film. Its financial performance demonstrated that there was a strong audience appetite for stylized, visually experimental action cinema. This success contributed to the broader trend of graphic novel-inspired films gaining mainstream acceptance in Hollywood during the late 2000s. Over time, the film's reception has become more nuanced. While early criticism focused heavily on narrative simplicity and exaggerated violence, later reassessments have often been more appreciative of its stylistic boldness. Some viewers and film analysts now view Wanted as a transitional film that helped bridge the gap between grounded action cinema and more visually experimental blockbuster filmmaking. Its willingness to fully commit to a heightened visual reality is often seen as its defining strength in hindsight. There was also some controversy surrounding the level of violence in the film. Although it was clearly stylized and not intended to be realistic, certain audiences and commentators questioned whether its depiction of violence was too exaggerated or glamorized. The film's approach to violence as entertainment rather than realism sparked discussion about the boundaries of action cinema, particularly in relation to younger audiences and global distribution standards. Despite mixed critical opinions, Wanted developed a strong identity in popular culture. It became known as a film that prioritized visual innovation and kinetic energy over traditional storytelling structure. This identity allowed it to maintain a lasting presence in discussions about stylized action films, even if it was not universally praised as a narrative achievement. Wanted has developed a lasting legacy not because it reinvented the action genre entirely, but because it pushed certain stylistic ideas further than most mainstream Hollywood films of its time. Its influence can be seen in the way later action cinema embraced exaggerated physics, stylized violence, and graphic novel-inspired visual grammar. While it may not be considered a foundational masterpiece of the genre, it occupies an important transitional space in the evolution of modern action filmmaking. One of the most significant aspects of its legacy is the normalization of hyper-stylized action sequences. Before Wanted, many action films still maintained at least a partial commitment to physical realism, even when using digital effects. After its release, more filmmakers became willing to break away from realism entirely in favor of expressive, physics-defying choreography. The idea that bullets could bend through space, that camera movement could ignore physical constraints, and that action could be edited like a visual rhythm rather than a spatial reality became more widely accepted in mainstream cinema. The film also contributed to the continued evolution of comic book and graphic novel adaptations. Although Wanted is not a traditional superhero story, it is heavily influenced by graphic novel aesthetics, particularly in its framing, pacing, and visual exaggeration. It helped reinforce the idea that comic-inspired films did not need to be tied to well-known superhero franchises in order to succeed. This opened creative space for more experimental adaptations and encouraged studios to explore darker, more unconventional source material. In terms of action choreography, Wanted influenced the use of dynamic camera integration. Later films increasingly adopted the idea that the camera itself could behave like an active participant in fight sequences rather than a passive observer. Rapid motions, sweeping arcs, and digitally enhanced camera paths became more common in action cinema and television, reflecting a shift toward more immersive and stylized visual storytelling. The film's visual concept of bending bullets became one of its most recognizable cultural contributions. Even outside of cinema, the idea became a shorthand reference for impossible or exaggerated action. It has been referenced in other films, television shows, video games, and online media as a symbol of extreme cinematic physics. The concept has also been widely parodied, which further solidified its place in pop culture awareness. When audiences think of stylized action defying logic, Wanted is often one of the first references that comes to mind. Wanted also influenced the way filmmakers approach transformation narratives in action films. The idea of an ordinary individual being rapidly trained into a highly skilled operative became more visually intense and accelerated in later media. While the underlying trope existed long before the film, Wanted amplified it with extreme visual progression, showing transformation not as a gradual learning process, but as a visually explosive evolution of capability. The film's impact on visual effects workflows is also notable. Its heavy integration of live-action footage with digital manipulation contributed to the growing acceptance of hybrid filmmaking techniques. The seamless blending of practical stunts with exaggerated digital environments demonstrated how far visual effects could be pushed without fully abandoning physical performance. This approach influenced later action productions that sought to balance stunt work with digital enhancement rather than replacing one with the other. In terms of cultural memory, Wanted has remained particularly associated with the late 2000s era of cinema, a period marked by experimentation in visual style and the transition toward digital-heavy filmmaking. It reflects a moment when Hollywood was actively exploring how far it could push visual exaggeration while still maintaining mainstream appeal. As a result, the film is often used as an example of early modern stylized action before the full dominance of later franchise-driven spectacle. The film also indirectly contributed to the rise of more visually aggressive action aesthetics in streaming-era content. Many television series and streaming films that focus on assassins, secret organizations, or enhanced combat sequences now use visual techniques similar to those popularized further by Wanted, including extreme slow motion, stylized violence, and dynamic camera distortion. Another part of its legacy lies in its role in shaping audience expectations for visual intensity. After Wanted, viewers became more accustomed to action sequences that prioritize spectacle over realism. This shift influenced not only cinema but also advertising, music videos, and digital media content, where exaggerated motion and stylized editing became more common tools for capturing attention. However, its legacy is also mixed in terms of narrative influence. While its visual style was widely noted, its storytelling approach did not inspire as many direct imitations. The film's emphasis on style over grounded narrative structure made it more of a visual reference point than a storytelling blueprint. As a result, its influence is stronger in aesthetics than in plot construction. Over time, one has also gained a kind of cult appreciation among viewers who value its boldness. It is often revisited as an example of film that fully committed to its own exaggerated reality without hesitation. This commitment to stylistic consistency, even at the expense of realism, has become one of its most respected qualities in retrospective discussions. Audience reactions to Wanted have always been varied, shaped heavily by personal expectations of what an action film should deliver. Some viewers approached it as a straightforward blockbuster and focused on the spectacle, while others interpreted it as a stylized commentary on identity, power, and modern life. This split in interpretation helped the film maintain a long-term presence in discussions about action cinema, even when opinions about its depth differed. For many audience members at the time of release, the most immediate reaction was excitement and sensory overload. The film's rapid pacing, exaggerated physics, and constant visual invention created a viewing experience that felt intense and unpredictable. Viewers who enjoyed high-energy action cinema often responded positively to the lack of realism, appreciating the freedom the film took with physics and logic. The curved bullet sequences, in particular, became a defining visual moment that audiences remembered long after leaving the theater. A significant portion of viewers interpreted the film as pure escapism. Wesley Gibson's transformation from a powerless office worker into an elite assassin resonated with audiences who felt disconnected from routine or restrictive environments. This fantasy of sudden empowerment, while extreme in its execution, tapped into a common emotional desire, the wish to break free from limitations and discover hidden potential. For these viewers, the film functioned less as a narrative to analyze and more as an experience of transformation and release. At the same time, some audience members engaged with the film on a symbolic or psychological level. They saw Wesley's journey not just as a physical transformation, but as a metaphor for identity reconstruction under external influence. The idea that a person could be reshaped by an organization into something entirely different raised questions about autonomy and self-definition. These interpretations often focused on whether Wesley truly became more himself, or simply replaced one form of control with another. Younger audiences, especially those exposed to early internet culture, often connected with the film's visual intensity and meme-like potential. Specific scenes, particularly the bullet-bending sequences and exaggerated fight choreography, circulated widely in online forums and video-sharing platforms. This helped the film gain a second life outside of theaters, where clips were frequently shared as examples of extreme cinematic action. For this audience, Wanted became part of early digital pop culture memory. Some viewers also interpreted the film through a more critical lens, focusing on its portrayal of violence and morality. The fraternity's ideology, which frames assassination as a form of balance or correction, led to discussions about whether the film was commenting on systems of justified violence or simply using that concept as a narrative device. These interpretations varied widely, with some seeing satire in the organization's logic and others viewing it as a stylized but straightforward fantasy of power. The character of Fox also generated strong audience interpretation. Some viewers saw her as a symbol of disciplined control, someone who has fully surrendered individuality to a system of order and violence. Others viewed her more emotionally, focusing on her relationship with Wesley and the subtle moments where her controlled exterior seemed to break. Her minimal dialogue encouraged audiences to project meaning onto her actions rather than receive explicit explanation, which contributed to varied interpretations. Audience reflection also often centered on the film's ending and its ambiguity. Rather than providing a fully resolved emotional closure, the film leaves certain narrative and philosophical questions open. This led to discussions about whether Wesley achieves true freedom or simply transitions into a different form of constraint. Some viewers appreciated this ambiguity, while others felt it left too many questions unanswered. International audiences responded differently depending on cultural expectations of action cinema. In some regions, the film's exaggerated style was embraced as innovative and entertaining. In others, audiences were more critical of its departure from realism. Despite these differences, the film maintained global recognition largely due to its strong visual identity, which transcended language barriers. Over time, audience interpretation has shifted. Initial reactions focused heavily on spectacle and novelty, but later viewers have been more willing to analyze the film's themes and structure. As stylized action became more common in mainstream media, Wanda began to be seen less as an outlier and more as an early example of a trend that would later expand across cinema and streaming content. Online communities have also played a role in shaping the film's long-term perception. Discussions on forums and social platforms often revisit Wanted as an example of bold, unapologetic action filmmaking. Some users defend it as underrated, while others critique its narrative simplicity. This ongoing debate has helped keep the film relevant in digital film culture long after its release window. The character development in Wanted is structured around transformation under pressure, with each major character reflecting a different response to systems of control, violence, and identity reshaping. While the film is heavily stylized and fast-paced, the underlying character arcs follow a clear progression from limitation to empowerment, and in some cases, from control to disillusionment. Wesley Gibson is the central figure of the film's character arc, and his development is the most dramatic and visible. At the beginning, Wesley is defined by passivity, frustration, and a complete lack of agency. He is trapped in a life he does not feel connected to, both professionally and personally. His identity is essentially erased by routine. This initial state is important because it establishes him as someone who does not actively shape his life, but rather endures it. When Wesley is introduced to fraternity, his arc begins as one of forced disruption. He is pulled out of his passive existence and placed into a system that demands total physical and psychological restructuring. Early in his training, Wesley is weak, uncertain, and often humiliated. These moments are not just physical challenges, but symbolic breakdowns of his previous identity. The organization's methods are designed to dismantle hesitation and rebuild instinct. As he progresses, Wesley's development becomes increasingly rapid. He learns combat skills, weapon control, and heightened perception techniques at an accelerated pace. This rapid progression is part of the film's stylized nature, but it also represents a thematic idea that transformation in this world is extreme and immediate rather than gradual. His confidence grows alongside his physical abilities, and he begins to assert control over situations that previously overwhelmed him. However, Wesley's arc is not purely about empowerment. It also involves increasing awareness of manipulation and truth distortion. As he learns more about fraternity, he begins to question the legitimacy of the system that created him. This introduces an internal conflict between obedience and autonomy. His development shifts from simple growth to critical awareness, where he must decide whether to accept the ideology he has been trained into or reject it. A major turning point in his arc is the revelation of his connection to his biological father. This discovery forces Wesley to reinterpret his entire journey. His identity is no longer just something shaped by training, but also by lineage and hidden history. This creates emotional tension within his development, as he must reconcile personal origin with imposed identity. His arc becomes not just about becoming powerful, but about understanding what that power is built upon. Fox, in contrast, has a more restrained but significant character arc. She begins as a highly controlled and disciplined assassin, fully integrated into fraternity's system. Her behavior is precise, emotionally restrained, and loyal to organizational rules. Unlike Wesley, she does not undergo a transformation from weakness to strength, but rather exists in a state of controlled stability from the beginning. However, as the story progresses, subtle cracks appear in Fox's emotional structure. Her interactions with Wesley suggest a conflict between loyalty to the system and personal feeling. While she does not openly rebel or dramatically change, her arc is defined by internal tension. She represents the idea of someone who has already been fully shaped by the system, but still retains fragments of individuality beneath the surface. Sloane, the leader of fraternity, has a character arc centered on ideology and hidden intent. Initially presented as a mentor figure, Sloane represents authority, guidance, and purpose. He appears to embody the moral justification of the organization's actions, presenting assassination as a necessary function of balance and correction. His character development is built on trust and perception rather than physical transformation. As the narrative unfolds, Sloane's true motivations are revealed, shifting his arc from mentor to antagonist. This reversal recontextualizes his earlier guidance, suggesting that his interpretation of fraternity's purpose is shaped by personal ambition rather than pure ideology. His arc demonstrates how authority figures in the film can be both creators and distorters of belief systems. The character Cross serves as a contrasting arc rooted in loss and vengeance. Initially positioned as an antagonist, Cross's development reveals a deeper personal connection to Wesley. His actions are driven by emotional trauma and a desire to correct perceived wrongs within the system. His arc reflects the idea that even within systems of control, individuals retain personal motivations that can conflict with organizational goals. Cross's relationship with Wesley also creates a mirror development structure. While Wesley is learning to become an assassin, Cross represents the consequences of that world's violence and fragmentation. Their arcs intersect to highlight generational conflict and the idea that identity is shaped by both creation and destruction. The fraternity itself functions almost as a collective character with its own arc. It begins as a structured, seemingly stable organization with a clear mission. As the story progresses, internal fractures are revealed, exposing ideological contradictions and power struggles. This organizational arc mirrors the personal arcs of the characters, suggesting that systems of control are just as unstable as the individuals within them. The costume and set design want to play a crucial role in reinforcing the film's identity as a stylized, heightened reality rather than a grounded action world. Every visual element, from clothing choices to architectural spaces, is carefully constructed to reflect themes of transformation, control, and hidden systems of power. The design language is not naturalistic but symbolic, using exaggeration, contrast, and repetition to support the film's narrative tone. Wesley Gibson's costumes are one of the clearest indicators of his character evolution. At the beginning of the film, he wears plain, ill-fitting office clothing that reflects his lack of confidence and personal identity. His wardrobe is intentionally dull, consisting of neutral colors and unremarkable designs that blend him into his environment. This visual invisibility reinforces his psychological state of being unnoticed and undervalued. As Wesley enters a fraternity and begins his transformation, his clothing gradually shifts. The changes are not immediate but progressive, mirroring his development. His outfits become more fitted, more structured, and more intentional in design. This transition reflects his growing sense of control and identity. By the later stages of the film, his clothing is more stylized and functional, often darker in tone and more aligned with the assassin aesthetic of the organization. Fox's costume design is far more consistent and symbolic. She is almost always dressed in tight, functional clothing that emphasizes movement, precision, and control. Her wardrobe is minimalistic but highly structured, reflecting her role as a disciplined operative within the fraternity. The use of leather-like materials and streamlined silhouettes reinforces her identity as someone shaped by training and systemized violence. Her costumes rarely change significantly, which visually reinforces her stability within the organization compared to Wesley's transformation. Sloane's wardrobe is designed to communicate authority and calm control. He is typically dressed in refined, formal clothing that blends executive professionalism with subtle militaristic undertones. His appearance reflects his role as both a leader and a manipulator of ideology. The costume design emphasizes order, suggesting that he operates within structured systems while also controlling them from within. Cross's costume design contrasts sharply with Sloane's controlled elegance. His clothing is more rugged, practical, and worn, reflecting a character who operates outside formal structure. His appearance suggests independence and emotional intensity rather than institutional control. The difference between Cross and Sloane is visually reinforced through their clothing, highlighting the ideological divide between them. The fraternity itself is represented through costume cohesion. Members of the organization often share visual similarities in their clothing, emphasizing uniformity and system alignment. While individual variations exist, there is a clear design language that suggests belonging to a structured group. This visual consistency reinforces the idea that members have been shaped into similar functional roles, reducing individuality in favor of efficiency. Set design is equally important in establishing the film's thematic contrast between ordinary life and hidden power structures. The early environments, particularly Wesley's workplace, are designed to feel repetitive and oppressive. The office space is filled with identical desks, fluorescent lighting, and dull color palettes. The architecture is functional but uninspiring, reinforcing a sense of entrapment and monotony. In contrast, the fraternity's environments are highly stylized and symbolic. The interiors often combine industrial elements with ornate or ancient-inspired design features. This mixture creates a sense of timelessness, suggesting that the organization exists outside normal societal progression. The spaces are large, echoing, and filled with architectural complexity, reinforcing the idea of secrecy and hierarchy. One of the most significant set pieces is the fraternity headquarters, which is designed to feel both mechanical and mythological. The space combines modern industrial construction with symbolic structures that hint at ritualistic or historical significance. The design suggests that the organization is not just a modern group, but part of a much older system of control and selection. The environment is deliberately disorienting, with layered levels, bridges, and open voids that emphasize scale and depth. Lighting within the sets is used to enhance emotional tone and narrative progression. Office environments are lit with flat, artificial lighting that removes depth and warmth. In contrast, fraternity spaces often use dramatic lighting contrasts, with strong shadows and focused beams of light that isolate characters within vast environments. This reinforces the psychological intensity of training and decision-making within the organization. The use of color in set design also supports thematic development. The world of Wesley's ordinary life is dominated by muted tones, such as gray, beige, and washed-out blues. As he transitions into fraternity, the palette becomes more saturated and visually dynamic, incorporating deeper reds, blacks, and metallic tones. This shift reflects his movement from emotional numbness to heightened awareness and intensity. Props and environmental details further reinforce the film's symbolic structure. Weapons, training devices, and architectural elements are often exaggerated in scale or design, emphasizing function over realism. The loom, for example, is not just a narrative device, but also a visual centerpiece that reflects the organization's belief in patterns and destiny. Its mechanical complexity and ritualistic presence give it symbolic weight within the set design. Even transitional spaces, such as hallways, training rooms, and transportation environments, are designed with careful attention to spatial distortion. Narrow corridors open into vast chambers, and enclosed spaces suddenly expand into large architectural voids. This manipulation of space reinforces the film's theme that reality is flexible and controlled by perception. The script of Wanted, written by Michael Brandt, Derek Haas, and Chris Morgan, is structured to prioritize momentum, attitude, and thematic clarity over dense exposition or traditional character-driven dialogue. The writing style reflects the film's overall philosophy. Identity is fluid, reality is flexible, and meaning is often communicated through action rather than long verbal explanation. As a result, the dialogue is sharp, functional, and frequently stylized to match the heightened world of the film. One of the most noticeable characteristics of the screenplay is its minimalism in early character dialogue. Wesley Gibson is introduced with conversations that emphasize frustration, sarcasm, and emotional detachment. His lines are often short, reactive, and passive, reflecting his lack of control over his own life. This early dialogue style establishes him as someone who does not assert himself verbally or emotionally, reinforcing his initial state of invisibility and disconnection. As the narrative progresses, Wesley's dialogue begins to change in tone and structure. His lines become more confident, direct, and assertive. This shift is subtle but important, as it reflects his internal transformation. The script does not always explicitly comment on his growth. Instead, it allows changes in speech patterns to signal character development. He moves from questioning statements to declarative language, mirroring his increasing control over his environment. The fraternity members, including Fox and Sloan, speak in more controlled and philosophical tone. Their dialogue often blends practical instruction with ideological justification. They rarely engage in casual conversation, instead framing their speech around purpose, destiny, and system logic. This creates a linguistic contrast between Wesley's evolving emotional expression and the organization's structured, almost ritualistic communication style. Sloane's dialogue is particularly important in shaping the ideological framework of the film. His lines often present the fraternity's actions as necessary and justified, using calm reasoning and moral framing. He speaks with authority and certainty, which initially positions him as a mentor figure. However, the script is carefully written so that his language also contains ambiguity, allowing later revelations to recontextualize his earlier statements. His dialogue is an example of controlled persuasion, designed to guide both characters and audience perception. Fox's dialogue is minimal but highly intentional. She often speaks in short, precise sentences that avoid emotional disclosure. This reinforces her identity as someone who has been shaped into efficiency and discipline. When she does express emotional undertones, they are subtle and often indirect, leaving interpretation open. The script uses her limited dialogue to emphasize that silence and action are often more important than verbal explanation in the world of the film. One of the most distinctive elements of the screenplay is its use of ironic or heightened phrasing during moments of extreme action. During violent sequences, characters sometimes deliver lines that contrast sharply with the intensity of the situation. This creates a tonal duality where dialogue does not always match emotional reality, enhancing the stylized nature of the film. Instead of realism, the script often prioritizes rhythm and impact. The training sequences in the film contain some of the most structured dialogue exchanges. These scenes are designed almost like instructional modules, with characters explaining rules, philosophy, and technique in a direct manner. However, even in these moments, the script avoids becoming overly expository. Information is often delivered in fragments, forcing both Wesley and the audience to piece together meaning gradually. Humor is also present in the screenplay, though it is often dark or understated. Wesley's early reactions to his situation include sarcastic or disbelieving remarks that reflect his psychological resistance to the world he is entering. This humor serves as a coping mechanism within the narrative and helps balance the intensity of the film's violent and dramatic elements. The humor is not dominant, but strategically placed to prevent tonal overload. A key feature of the script is its reliance on implication rather than explanation. Many aspects of the fraternity's structure, history, and philosophy are not fully explained through dialogue. Instead, they are revealed through partial conversations, observed behavior, and visual context. This approach encourages viewers to actively interpret the world rather than passively receive information. The screenplay also uses repetition in dialogue to reinforce thematic ideas. Certain phrases and concepts are repeated in different contexts, particularly those related to destiny, control, and selection. This repetition mirrors the idea of patterns within the story's world, suggesting that language itself is part of the system that governs behavior. Wesley's interactions with Cross introduce some of the most emotionally charged dialogue in film. These conversations are structured around conflict, revelation, and personal history. Unlike the controlled language of the fraternity, these exchanges are more emotionally volatile and direct, reflecting the personal stakes of their relationship. The dialogue here serves to expose hidden connections and challenge established beliefs. The final portions of the script shift toward more symbolic and confrontational language. As characters move toward resolution, dialogue becomes less about explanation and more about positioning and intent. The script reduces verbal complexity in favor of emotional and ideological clarity, allowing action to carry much of the narrative weight. The marketing and promotional campaign for Wanted was designed to position the film as a high-energy, visually distinctive action experience that stood apart from conventional summer blockbusters. From the earliest trailers and posters, the promotional strategy emphasized style, intensity, and the idea of a hidden world of assassins operating beneath ordinary life. Rather than focusing heavily on narrative complexity, the marketing leaned into striking imagery, fast-paced editing, and the star power of Angelina Jolie and James McAvoy. One of the central marketing themes was transformation. Promotional materials frequently highlighted Wesley Gibson's journey from an unremarkable office worker to a powerful assassin. This transformation was visually represented in posters and trailers through contrast imagery, showing the character in both mundane and action-oriented states. The goal was to communicate a fantasy of empowerment, suggesting that the film was about unlocking hidden potential and entering a secret world of extreme capability. Angelina Jolie's presence was a major focus of the promotional campaign. Her established global fame made her a key selling point, and marketing materials often emphasize her role as Fox, a mysterious and highly skilled assassin. Posters frequently feature her in combat-ready poses, highlighting her physicality and screen presence. Even though her character has limited dialogue in the film, the marketing positioned her as one of the central attractions, reinforcing her status as an action icon. James McAvoy was presented in the marketing as a rising lead actor undergoing a dramatic transformation. Promotional interviews and featurettes often focused on his physical preparation and the intensity of his training for the role. This helped frame the film as not only a visual spectacle, but also a performance-driven story about personal evolution. The contrast between McAvoy's early career dramatic roles and his new action-oriented image was used as part of the promotional narrative. The trailers for Wanted were particularly influential in shaping audience expectations. They were edited with rapid cuts, dramatic music, and highly stylized action sequences. One of the most prominent features in the trailers was the bullet-bending effect, which was showcased as a signature visual element. This effect became central to the film's identity and marketing, often used as a defining image that set it apart from other action films. The marketing also emphasized secrecy and hidden systems of power. Taglines and promotional descriptions often reference a world operating beneath normal society, where elite assassins carry out missions based on coded patterns and hidden knowledge. This framing helped position the film as more than just an action story, but as an entry into a secret mythology. The idea of discovering a hidden organization resonated strongly with audiences who enjoy conspiracy-driven narratives. Posters for the film typically used dark, high-contrast imagery with bold composition. Characters were often shown in dynamic poses, surrounded by visual distortion or fragmented design elements that reflected the film's stylized action sequences. The visual branding was consistent with the film's aesthetic, reinforcing the idea that Wanted was not grounded realism but heightened cinematic expression. Television spots and online promotions expanded on the film's visual intensity by focusing on short, impactful sequences. These advertisements often isolated individual action moments, such as gunfire, combat, or high-speed movement, rather than presenting longer narrative context. This approach was intended to capture attention quickly and communicate the film's energy in a condensed format. The promotional campaign also made use of behind-the-scenes featurettes, which highlighted the physical training of actors, stunt coordination, and the integration of visual effects. These materials were designed to give audiences a sense of craftsmanship behind the spectacle, showing that the extreme visuals were supported by both practical and digital filmmaking techniques. This helped balance the perception that the film was purely digital by emphasizing its hybrid production process. International marketing for Wanted adapted its messaging to different regions, but maintained a core focus on action, transformation, and visual spectacle. In many territories, Angelina Jolie was a dominant marketing figure, reflecting her global recognition. In others, the emphasis was placed more heavily on the comic-inspired visual style and high-intensity action sequences. Merchandising for the film was relatively limited compared to large franchise properties, but its visual identity extended into promotional partnerships, magazine features, and entertainment media coverage. The film was frequently discussed in terms of its visual innovation, which helped sustain interest leading up to its release. One of the most significant aspects of the marketing strategy was its alignment with the growing trend of stylized action cinema. The promotional materials positioned Wanted as part of a new wave of visually experimental blockbusters, encouraging audiences to expect something more exaggerated and visually bold than traditional action films. This helped differentiate it in a crowded market of summer releases. Overall, the marketing and promotion of Wanted were highly focused on visual identity, transformation narrative, and star-driven appeal. The campaign successfully communicated the film's central ideas of hidden worlds and extreme capability while emphasizing its unique visual style. By prioritizing spectacle and transformation over detailed plot explanation, the marketing positioned Wanted as an experience-driven film designed to attract audiences through intensity, style, and curiosity about its secret assassin mythology. Wanted can be better understood when placed alongside other action films, comic book adaptations, and stylized cinema from both before and after its release. While it is not a traditional superhero film, it exists in a shared creative space with works that explore enhanced abilities, secret organizations, and exaggerated visual storytelling. Comparing it to similar films highlights both its unique stylistic identity and its position within the evolution of modern action cinema. One useful comparison is with The Matrix, which also blends action with philosophical undertones and highly stylized visuals. Both films use the idea of a hidden reality operating beneath the surface of ordinary life. However, The Matrix presents its world through a structured philosophical framework centered on simulation and existential awakening, while Wanted focuses more on personal transformation and inherited systems of control. The Matrix uses digital reality as its foundation, whereas Wanted uses exaggerated physical reality shaped by secret human organizations. Visually, both films employ slow motion and enhanced perception effects, but Wanted pushes further into graphic novel-inspired distortion and bullet trajectory manipulation. Another relevant comparison is with Fight Club, particularly in its themes of identity, dissatisfaction, and rebellion against systemic structures. Both films feature protagonists who begin in states of emotional disconnection and consumer-driven frustration. However, Fight Club focuses on psychological fragmentation and internal conflict, while Wanted externalizes transformation into physical empowerment and action-based progression. Where Fight Club deconstructs identity, Wanted reconstructs it into a weaponized form. Within the comic book adaptation landscape, Wanted can be compared to early superhero-era films, such as Spider-Man and X-Men. These films also explore transformation, hidden identity, and responsibility, but they tend to maintain a stronger connection to emotional realism and moral structure. Wanted diverges from this by removing traditional heroic morality and replacing it with a more ambiguous system of justified violence. Its characters are not defined by saving others, but by participating in controlled elimination systems, which give the film a darker and more morally flexible tone. Wanted also shares stylistic DNA with films like Sin City, which heavily embrace graphic novel aesthetics. Both films use exaggerated visuals, stylized violence, and heightened reality. However, Sin City remains more visually faithful to its comic source material, often replicating panel-like compositions and stark black and white imagery with selective color use. Wanted instead uses motion-based distortion, camera movement, and physics manipulation to achieve a similar stylized effect, making its visual identity more kinetic and less static. When compared to later action films such as John Wick, Wanted can be seen as an early experiment in stylized combat choreography that prioritizes visual rhythm and exaggerated capability. John Wick refines this approach by grounding its action in consistent internal rules and physical plausibility within its world, while Wanted allows for more fantastical deviations from reality, such as curved bullets and impossible trajectories. Both films emphasize precision and skill, but Wanted leans more heavily into visual spectacle and symbolic physics. In relation to Morabek Mambatov's other works, particularly Night Watch and Day Watch, Wanted represents a continuation of his interest in hidden worlds, stylized action, and mythological systems embedded within modern settings. However, Wanted simplifies the mythological complexity in favor of a more accessible narrative structure and faster pacing, making it more aligned with Hollywood blockbuster expectations than his earlier, more culturally specific films. Compared to traditional assassin or espionage films, such as Mission Impossible or Bourne series entries, Wanted is significantly less grounded in realism. The Bourne films focus on memory, identity, and procedural realism, using shaky camera work and practical stunts to reinforce authenticity. Wanted, in contrast, rejects realism in favor of exaggerated perception and visual abstraction. While both explore themes of identity and control, they differ fundamentally in execution and tone. Within the broader category of transformation narratives, Wanted also stands alongside films like Iron Man, where an ordinary or flawed individual becomes enhanced through technology or training. However, Iron Man emphasizes responsibility, public consequence, and technological ethics, while Wanted focuses more on personal awakening within a hidden system of violence. The moral framing in Wanted is less about heroism and more about understanding and navigating systems of control. The film also contrasts with later stylized action franchises that embrace similar visual experimentation, but refine it with more consistent internal logic. In many ways, Wanted represents an early stage in a shift toward highly stylized blockbuster action, where visual imagination began to take priority over strict realism. Later films would often borrow its energy, but apply more structured world building or tighter narrative constraints. In terms of tone, Wanted occupies a unique middle ground between serious action drama and exaggerated fantasy spectacle. It does not fully commit to grounded realism, nor does it fully embrace comedic absurdity. Instead, it maintains consistent tone of heightened seriousness within an impossible world. This tonal positioning makes it difficult to classify strictly within one genre, contributing to its distinct identity in comparison to more conventional films. Overall, Wanted stands as a transitional work within action cinema. It bridges grounded early 2000s realism with the more visually experimental and stylized approaches that became increasingly common in later years. While it shares thematic and stylistic elements with many films, its most distinctive quality lies in its commitment to bending physical reality itself as a storytelling tool, placing it in a unique position within the evolution of modern action filmmaking.